If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying these stories, there's a link below to buy me a cup of coffee. This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HassidicStory.com. HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. Shalom Aleichem, my sweetest friends. It is my absolute pleasure to be recording the stories again this week. And this week I have 3 stories for you. But before I begin, this episode is dedicated by Naomi Stahl in honor of the miracles that saved her husband's life. May Hashem bless him with good health and the whole family with Shalom Bayit, Parnasa, health, and Chassidic Nachas from their daughter, Batya Nechama Devora, and only revealed good Bezat Hashem. And if you'd like to dedicate an episode, my friends, you can do so on my website. And also, my personal dedication every week since the war began. This podcast is dedicated to the success of our soldiers in battle, wherever they are, Bezat Hashem. May Hashem keep them safe and healthy. The returning of all the hostages, whole, healthy, and alive. The refuah shlema, the full recovery of everybody who's been injured or who is ill. The comforting of those that lost loved ones. And the continued unity of the Jewish people here in the land of Israel and all around the world. Be'ezat Hashem. And I say that as somebody who lives right near the Knesset and every day hears the protests. And really, I understand that everybody has different views. I just really hope that we keep it all together. Be'ezat Hashem. As I mentioned in previous episodes, I end up spending many hours working on the stories before I tell them, and I didn't expect that I would be spending all day basically working on these 3 stories, but here you go, my friends. The first story is the Baal Shem Tov story, because of course you can't go too long without a story of the Baal Shem Tov, and it's been a little while. In a small town, there was a wealthy merchant whose name was Reb Meir, and Reb Meir seemed to have everything. He'd been married for many years. He had a huge home, a successful business. The one thing that he did not have was children. And he and his wife would look at one another and they would say, "What's a life without a family? If only Hashem would bless us." And even though he had friends that lived in Mejibuz and had been telling him for years to go to the Baal Shem Tov to get a blessing, Reb Meir was not interested. You see, Reb Meir was a businessman. He was a man of reason and commerce, and someone who believed in the natural order of the world and how things worked. And yes, of course, he was a religious Jew, followed halacha, but all these stories of the Baal Shem Tov and the miracles that he was able to do, he didn't believe in any of them. In one winter, he happened to be on a business trip that brought him to Mejibuz, and he stayed with an old friend, and the two of them hadn't seen one another in many years. And as they sat by the fireplace, they shared what had happened to them over the last few years. And when Reb Meir's friend learned that he and his wife still did not have any children, and that they had never gone to the Baal Shem Tov for a blessing, the friend looked at Meir and he said, "How can you miss such an opportunity? We have a miracle worker. We have the greatest tzaddik alive right now, right here in Mejibuz. And now that you're here, there's no way that I'm going to let you leave without me first taking you to the Holy Rebbe to get a blessing." He said, "Trust me, you're not the first childless person to go to the Baal Shem Tov. Many have gone before you and they've had children. You have to have faith in the Rebbe and he can bless you and you will have children." And Reb Meir, even though normally he would say no, something had stirred in his heart. Maybe it was being in his friend's home, or maybe because he was in Mejibuz. But whatever it is, to his shock and surprise, he found himself nodding his head, agreeing to go to the Rebbe. And the next morning, Reb Meir found himself standing in front of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Rebbe's eyes went straight through him, penetrating not just his exterior, but looking deep into his soul. And he could see that yes, he was a successful merchant, but he carried such a deep sadness in his heart over not having children. And then Reb Meir described his situation. Now, for many years, he and his wife had tried. They'd been to the best doctors. They tried all kinds of remedies. And what is a life without children? What's the point of all this wealth and success if there's no one to share it with? So the Baal Shem Tov listened, and then he said, "I want you to sell all of the merchandise you have. Every business investment you have, I want you to convert it into cash. And then I want you to go to the Gentile official in your city and offer to buy his granary. And within a year, I guarantee you that a son will be born to you. And when he is, I want you to inform me of the birth of your son." Reb Meir was taken aback. No blessing, no saying Tehillim, no amulet, just a business transaction. Now, Reb Meir understood that buying a granary was no ordinary purchase. You see, today we have supermarkets. We have food that can sit on the shelves for years. We have refrigeration. But in those days, food was scarce, and food security was one of the biggest problems that everybody had to deal with. So if you owned a granary, you were the source of a constant blessing. You were connected to food itself. And Reb Meir understood that owning a granary, which was used to store wheat and other grains, would be a vessel to receive divine abundance, not just in money, but in all areas of his life. But still, he expected something a little more mystical than a practical business deal. And so Reb Meir returned home somewhat skeptical. And to his surprise, when he got back home, the Gentile official of the city that never wanted to do business with any of the Jews had issued a summons for Reb Meir to appear before him, because the Gentile official wanted Reb Meir to buy his granary. Now, a normal person would think this was a miracle and understand that the Baal Shem Tov's blessing was behind it. But Reb Meir didn't see it. And so he sold all of his merchandise, converted it to cash, and bought the granary. And within a year, his wife gave birth to a son. And he made no connection with what the Baal Shem Tov said whatsoever. As a matter of fact, he completely forgot about the Baal Shem Tov's prediction, and he just said, "Wow, what a coincidence." And then, of course, he forgot about the Baal Shem Tov's request to be informed of the birth of his son. And you know what happened? Unfortunately, my friends, the joy of having a son was soon overshadowed by a new problem. This young boy was so wild and untamable that no Melamed could teach him. And now Reb Meir regretted even having a son, because no one could control him. His hair grew long. He would play outside all day and come home dirty. And he would say to Hashem, "This is the son that I longed for so many years." And several years passed, and business once again brought Reb Meir to Mezhibuz. And once again, he stayed with the same friend, and they did the same thing, talking about what was new in their family and what had happened over the previous years. The friend was so happy to hear that Reb Meir and his wife had finally been blessed with a child, but of course he was saddened to hear that the boy was like a wild animal. And then the friend asked Reb Meir, "Did you do what the Baal Shem Tov said? Did you inform him of the birth of your son?" And Reb Meir said, "No, I didn't even think about the Baal Shem Tov." "You think the Baal Shem Tov had anything to do with this?" The friend said, "Meir, what's wrong with you? The Baal Shem Tov had everything to do with this. He's the one who told you to buy the granary. He promised that within a year you'd have a son, and you do. And he also asked you to tell him when your son was born, and you didn't do it. And now you're going to have to go to the Baal Shem Tov and make amends. Maybe Be'ezrat Hashem, he'll be able to bless you again." And Meir was a businessman, so he agreed. A promise was a promise, and he had not kept his promise. Before long, he found himself standing in the home of the Heilig Baal Shem Tov for a second time, and he begged the Baal Shem Tov to forgive him for not telling him about the birth of his son. But then Reb Meir said, "But Rebbe, sometimes I really regret that I even ever asked for a son, because I get no nachas from the boy. He's like a savage beast. No one can educate him, and I don't know what to do with the child." The Baal Shem Tov's eyes penetrated Reb Meir like the first time, and he could see the pain of the father. And he told him, "I want you to go back home and sell the granary, and then take all of your cash and go to Leipzig to the annual fair and stay there for an entire year. And when you return, you'll find that your son has settled down and become a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar." The Leipzig fair, which was in Germany, was no ordinary market. It was one of the most important commercial gatherings in all of Europe, dating all the way back to the Middle Ages. Jewish merchants from across Eastern Europe would travel there to buy textiles, furs, and other valuable goods, and then trade them throughout the year. So it seems strange that the Baal Shem Tov told Reb Meir to spend an entire year there, because most of the merchants did their business, and they were gone within a few weeks. But Reb Meir understood that this must be part of the spiritual remedy for not telling the Baal Shem Tov about his son's birth. And so he went home and did as he was told, and with a huge amount of money in cash, he went to the fair in Leipzig. He tried to stretch out his business for as long as he could, but after 4 months, all of the traders and buyers were gone. The fair was closed up, and there was nothing more for him to do. He had bought absolutely everything that he wanted or could buy. And now he said to himself, what am I going to do here in Leipzig for another 8 months? He couldn't figure out what to do, and he got bored and restless, and so he decided to go back home. And he loaded up a wagon that he rented with all the merchandise that he had bought and started heading back. And when they were riding, the driver took a wrong turn and they lost their way. And one day led to the next until it was Friday and Shabbos was approaching, and there was no sign of civilization along the road that they were traveling on. It was getting closer and closer to when Reb Meir couldn't travel anymore because of Shabbos. And so he asked the driver to drop him off by the edge of a forest. And he said, you go one way and I'll walk the other, and hopefully we'll find a place to stay. And Reb Meir started walking into the forest, and after going a few hundred meters, he saw a light flickering in the distance. He continued in the direction of the light until he came to a house in a clearing in the forest. And there was a mezuzah on the door, and the lights that he saw were Shabbos candles. And when Reb Meir knocked on the door, he saw there was a Jew davening there by himself. A servant let him in, and seeing that Reb Meir had not brought any Shabbos clothes, he went to get him some clean clothes for Shabbos. And the two of them spent Shabbos together. They shared Divrei Torah, they sang, the food was wonderful. And when Shabbos was over and they recited Havdalah, Reb Meir began to wonder what happened to his wagon and all of his merchandise. And the host said to him, what was in the wagon? Reb Meir said, I've been in Leipzig for 4 months. And I spent a great deal of money on that merchandise. I wonder where my wagoneer went and where the merchandise went as well. So the host said to him, listen, I'm very wealthy. I'd like to buy all of your merchandise. I'll give you half of the money in cash right now, and the other half the next time I see you. So Reb Meir received half of the money in cash, and the other half a promissory note. And then they happened to look outside the window, and the host says to Reb Meir, isn't that your wagon and driver coming up? And sure enough, the wagon was there with all of the merchandise. They unloaded it into the cellar of this Jew living in the middle of the forest. And Reb Meir was about to leave, and then he wondered to himself, well, where should I go now? And he said, well, the Baal Shem Tov said to stay in Leipzig for a year. And now that I've sold on my merchandise, I might as well go back to Leipzig and buy some more. And then when I return back, I'll collect the rest of the money. So Reb Meir went to Leipzig, and he found some new merchandise. And in the course of his business, he asked if anybody knew who was this man in the middle of the forest, but no one had ever heard of him. And then Reb Meir started to worry because this man owed him 85,000 rubles, which was an absolute fortune. And when he finished all of his business in Leipzig, he took his merchandise and was about to go back into the forest. And just as he's leaving the city, a man stops him and he says, you have a note of mine, don't you remember? Here, let me pay you what I owe you. And Reb Meir looks up, and there it is, the man from the forest. And now Reb Meir wants to know what's going on here. He says to the man, who are you really? You're not just a merchant. And the man says, what does it matter? Here, he gave him 85,000 rubles. He said, here's your money in cash. And by the way, when you go back to the Heilige Baal Shem Tov, send regards to him from Yonah. So Reb Meir had all of his money. He had new merchandise. And as the mysterious merchant disappeared, Reb Meir wondered, how did he know about the Baal Shem Tov? And who is this Yonah that appeared in the forest and just as quickly disappeared? And Reb Meir finally made his way home after a year, and to his great surprise and joy, his son had settled down and began learning, and he actually was becoming a Talmid Chacham, a real Torah scholar. And Reb Meir didn't wait this time. He immediately went to Mezhibuz to thank the Baal Shem Tov for everything. And then he said to the Baal Shem Tov, by the way, Rebbe, I have regards for you from somebody who calls himself Yonah. And the Baal Shem Tov's eyes opened with wonder and reverence. And he said, from Yonah? Do you know who this Yonah is? And Reb Meir said, no, but he lives in the forest, and apparently he can appear and disappear at will. And the Baal Shem Tov said, that was none other than Yonah ben Amittai, the prophet Yonah, sent by Hashem thousands of years ago to warn the people of Nineveh, had appeared to help fulfill the blessing for a Jewish father whose heart was broken. And this was no coincidence, my friends. You see, Yonah's story was one of running away from his mission, trying to escape his divine purpose, just like Reb Meir had tried to escape the Baal Shem Tov's instruction to stay in Leipzig for a full year. And just as Yonah eventually fulfilled his mission and brought transformation to Nineveh, now he helped Reb Meir complete his journey and bring a transformation to his son. And just like Yonah's story ends with God's compassion for those that did tshuva, here too we see God's compassion for Reb Meir and his son. We see the divine intervention had guided Reb Meir at every step, even when he tried to leave the path that was set for him. The granary, the wrong turn in the forest, the stranger who bought his merchandise, and the transformation of his own son. None of those were the coincidences that Reb Meir thought they were. May Hashem bless us to recognize the blessings and guidance that appear in our lives, even when they come in ways that we did not expect. And may we never forget our promises, especially to tzaddikim like the Heilige Baal Shem Tov. I have another story for you. Rabbi Mordechai Dov of Hornstein-Eipel lived from 1839 to 1903. He was the grandson of the Holy Rebbe Yaakov Yisrael Twersky of Chernobyl, who lived from 1794 to 1876, from the great dynasty of Chernobyl tzaddikim. And of course, you know that Rabbi Twersky, Rabbi Avraham Twersky, was related to this dynasty as well. When Rabbi Mordechai Dov was still a young boy, he was orphaned from his parents and went to live with his grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael Twersky, who was known to be a great tzaddik and a great rebbe. And it was late one evening, and the young Mordechai Dov was sitting and studying Talmud, and suddenly he heard somebody crying in the house. And he looked at the entrance of the house, and there was a poor Jew who was explaining that he didn't pay the poritz, the nobleman who owned his tavern, the lease money for the tavern. And the poritz has sent a servant to inform him that he has to pay the money by the end of the month, or else. And of course, if you listened to this podcast before, you know the or else meant being thrown into a prison, or worse, God forbid. And to make sure that the Jew wouldn't get any benefit from the tavern until his debt was paid, the poritz ordered his servants remove all the windows from the tavern and this Jew's house. And so this Jew was crying. He said, "We don't have any windows, and it's so cold outside. My wife and children are freezing, and I don't have any money to pay the debt. And what am I going to do? And I came for a bracha. Please, you have to help me." The Rebbitzin, the wife of Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael, told this tavern owner, "My husband, the Rebbe, is not at home right now, but take my advice. Go to my grandson, Mordechai Dov, and he'll be able to help you." And so, this Jew went to the room of Mordechai Dov, who at the time was 12 years old, and he found him learning Gemara. And he tells this young boy his whole story, and Mordechai Dov, he sighs, and he said, "If my grandfather were here, he'd be able to save you. But what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to help you?" And the tavern owner, he started crying, and he said, "If you truly can't help me, then I don't have any complaints against you. But if you can help me, and you don't do it, I will never forgive you. Not in this world, and not in the world to come." Now what happens next, my friends, is so powerful. Mordechai Dov was shaking, and he said to the tavern owner, "Don't cry, my friend. Light the lantern, and let's go to the mikveh." Now it was late at night, and it was freezing cold and snowing outside. And the waters of the river were nearly frozen. See, in those days, the mikveh wasn't like the mikvahs that we have today. Warm indoor pools. There was just a wooden structure built over the frozen river, and they would make a hole in the ice and dip into the freezing water. So they went at night with the lantern, and when they reached the mikveh, Mordechai Dov got undressed and went inside the freezing cold water. And a long time passed, and he did not come up from under the water. And the tavern owner started worrying for Mordechai Dov's life. He also got undressed, and he was about to jump into the water to save the boy, when suddenly he felt a hand pushing him back onto the ice and keeping him in his place. And an entire, long, nerve-wracking hour passed, and then suddenly the tavern owner sees the young Mordechai Dov come up from the water, and he says to the tavern owner, "You have nothing to fear, my friend. Go home, and with Hashem's help, the poritz will not touch you." Now that in itself was a miracle, to stay under the water for that long, the freezing cold water. But this Jew wanted to go home and save his family. And as soon as he got back, even though it was the middle of the night, his wife said to him, "The Poritz is looking for you urgently." So the tavern owner went to the Poritz's home, and the Poritz said to him, "Ah, so glad you're here. Tonight, when I went to sleep, suddenly I felt a pair of hands gripping my throat, trying to strangle me, and I couldn't breathe. I tried to set myself free, but I couldn't do it. I was covered in cold sweat, and I thought I was going to die. And then I realized this must be heavenly punishment for having tormented you and leaving your family to freeze in the cold and the snow. In my dream, I promised that I would waive the debt you owe and reinstall the windows that I had my men remove. In the moment when I decided this in my heart, the hands that were strangling me left my throat. And of course, the Poritz forgave the debt, and he reinstalled the windows that night. When the tavern owner returned to the home of Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael, the grandfather, and saw him standing there, and he told the grandfather the whole story and what his righteous 12-year-old grandson had done. And Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael sighed, and he said, "The young boy is already willing to put his life at risk to save other Jews. I was hoping to delay that for a little bit longer." And you see, my friends, this is what it is to really have Mesirut Nefesh, self-sacrifice for your fellow Jews. Rabbi Mordechai Dov, even when he was a young boy, understood that when it comes to the suffering of a fellow Jew, we have to be willing to risk everything to help them. And this is the deepest Torah, my friends, that we're all connected, we're all one neshama. May we merit to have such compassion for one another, Bezrat Hashem, feeling another's pain as if it were our own, and to act with courage, even when it seems impossible. Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shemo Sherit Yisrael, Yan Yovan, Yan Yovan Yisrael, Yan Yovan, Yan Yovan Yisrael, Yan Yovan, Yan Yovan, Yan Yovan, Yan Yovan, Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, La la la, ya la la, ya la la, I have the third story for you. As I mentioned, now I don't mind, but Wednesday night, I'm kicking myself for this. But I keep doing it. There must be something wrong with me. Something good, of course. If you're going to have problems, a good problem would be just to tell too many Chassidic stories. So here we go. Reb Hillel Paritcher, who lived from 1795 to 1864, is one of the great and famous Chabad Chassidim. He started off as a follower of the Mittler Rebbe, who passed away in 1827, and later became a devoted Chassid of the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, who passed away in 1866. Reb Hillel was known for his brilliant mind, his long davening, and especially his unwavering commitment to the holiness of Shabbos. Now, my friends, you have to understand what it meant in those days in Russia when Jews would open their stores on Shabbos. And of course in America as well, not just in Russia. But in America, I think it's a lot easier to close a store on Shabbos than it was back then. The pressure from the Russian government was so strong, and the poverty was so harsh and crushing that many Jews felt they had no choice but to work on Shabbos. But for Reb Hillel, there was never a compromise when it came to Shabbos. Everybody knows that we get an extra neshama on Shabbos, and there's a special light coming down on that day. And that's why we sanctify it, my friends, with meals and davening and rest and family time, because the special light is coming down on that day, and that's the way to bring in the light into our souls. It was the 1840s, and Reb Hillel arrived in a certain town in White Russia, where he discovered that some of the Jewish storekeepers were keeping their businesses open on Shabbos. And for him, there was nothing worse. Shabbos wasn't just one of the other mitzvot. For him, it was the purpose of God creating the world. And to not keep Shabbos, it meant that you were denying God's existence almost. So Reb Hillel called a gathering of all of the Jewish merchants in the town. And the room was packed with all of the Jewish businessmen, and Reb Hillel could see on their faces how hard they worked and how difficult their lives were. And Reb Hillel began, he said, "Do you know, my friends, that when a Jew keeps Shabbos, it's not him keeping Shabbos, but Shabbos keeping him? The Holy Zohar teaches us that all of the blessings from the entire week flow from Shabbos. And when you open your stores, you're closing the channels of the blessing coming down from Shemayim, from heaven. His words, of course, were not words of judgment. They were words of love, and they penetrated the hearts of the merchants there. One by one, these hard-working Jews nodded their heads in agreement. They would for sure close their stores on Shabbos, but there was one condition. One of the merchants spoke up and he said, Rebbe, there's a wealthy Jew in this town, and his business is much bigger than any of ours. If we close on Shabbos and he stays open, we're just going to lose everything. So if you convince him to close his store on Shabbos, we'll do the same. So Reb Hillel understood. The competition was fierce, and making a living was already hard enough. He immediately sent a messenger to summon the wealthy businessman to come and speak with him, but the rich man refused to come. So another messenger was sent, and then a third one, but the rich man would not come. And it wasn't just that he was disrespecting Reb Hillel, but he was not interested in interrupting his profitable business to be closed on Shabbos. So Reb Hillel decided to remain in town for that Shabbos, hoping that his presence would increase the holiness of the day for everyone. And as the sun set on Friday evening and the holy Shabbos came in, something extraordinary happened. That same wealthy businessman who refused to come and see Reb Hillel was suddenly struck with an excruciating pain in his stomach. The pain became so intense, his screams could be heard all the way through the town, coming out of his mansion. And with each hour, it got worse. The wealthy Jew's wife understood that there are no coincidences in this world, and she knew that her husband's suffering was connected to his disrespect toward Reb Hillel. Leaving her husband in pain, she rushed to where Reb Hillel was staying and begged him for a blessing. She burst into the room, and there was Reb Hillel surrounded by his Chassidim, enjoying the Shabbos meal. And she says, Rebbe, please, have mercy on my husband. He's in terrible pain. Please give him a blessing for refuah shlema, for healing. Of course, the room fell silent, and everybody looked at Reb Hillel, expecting him to immediately bless the man. But Reb Hillel remained silent, and he just looked at the Shabbos tablecloth. And the people there, they thought maybe because you're not supposed to mention illness on Shabbos, they said to him, Rebbe, maybe you can say Shabbati milzok urefuah krova lavo, that it's Shabbos, and when it's forbidden to cry out, the healing will come soon, which is normally what's said on Shabbos as a blessing for a person that's sick, God forbid. But Reb Hillel remained silent. He didn't say a word. And the woman, seeing that nothing was going to come out of Reb Hillel, she left with her head bowed down and tears streaming down her face. And throughout the night and the next day, everyone in town could hear that her husband's condition was getting worse. The pain was so unbearable that he couldn't eat or sleep. And when there were 3 stars in the sky, marking the end of Shabbos, Reb Hillel sat with his Chassidim from Melava Malka, the meal that escorts the Shabbos queen on her departure. And as they were singing the sweet nigunim to lift up the soul, giving it strength to go into the week, trying to hold on to Shabbos just a little bit longer, suddenly the door burst open. It was the businessman's wife standing there, her eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. She said, Rebbe, please, I'm begging you, have rachmanis, have compassion, have mercy on my husband. He can't take it anymore. Please bless him with a refuah shlema, a complete healing. And this time Reb Hillel looked up at her with eyes full of compassion, and he said, Shabbat hi milzok urefuah krova lavo. And now the Chassidim were confused. Why was Reb Hillel using this phrase now when Shabbos was over? That saying was meant for Shabbos, not for the weekday. And seeing that they were confused, Reb Hillel had a smile on his face. And he said, my friends, the words have a deeper meaning. Shabbat hi milzok. If Shabbos stops crying out in pain because it's being desecrated, urefuah krova lavo, then the healing will speedily come. And then he turned to the woman and he said, go tell your husband that if he promises in the presence of 3 people that he will always close his businesses on Shabbos from now on, he will be healed. And 3 Chassidim immediately stood up, ready to help bring peace between the wealthy Jew and Shabbos. And they accompanied the wife back to her home, where they found her husband so weak and pale and in such pain. And when they told him Reb Hillel's message, the wealthy man, now humbled greatly by his suffering, made a promise before the 3 witnesses that he would never again open any business on Shabbos. And the moment that those words left his lips, his face began to relax, and the pain started to disappear. and within an hour he was able to sit up and eat some food, and by the morning, to everyone's amazement, he was completely recovered. And when the next Friday afternoon came, the businessman closed his store earlier than anyone else in preparation for Shabbos. And the other merchants seeing this decided to close their stores earlier as well. And so it was that the Kedusha, the holiness of Shabbos, was restored to the entire town. And what a lesson this is for us, my friends. The Heilige Baal Shem Tov taught that sometimes physical suffering comes to heal a spiritual illness, and what looks like punishment is actually the soul's desperate attempt to try to reconnect with Hashem. The businessman's pain was really the pain of his neshama, crying out for the light of Shabbos. And every time we honor Shabbos, by preparing for it in the most beautiful way, by not thinking about our weekday concerns, by creating a time and a space where our souls can be what they truly are. We're not just keeping halacha. We're saying that there's something beyond the material world, beyond more than money and physicality. May we merit, Be'ezrat Hashem, to truly have the light of Shabbos in our lives and create homes and communities where Shabbos is welcomed with joy and never, God forbid, a burden. And may we merit to always have the joy of Shabbos, not just on Shabbos itself, but even in every day of the week. Be'ezrat Hashem. Thank you so much for listening, my sweetest friends. Thank you to Holy Sister Naomi for sponsoring the podcast. And really, may Hashem bless you and your family with all the blessings. Kol ha-brachot v'kol ha-smachot v'kol ha-yeshuot. All of the blessings and all of the joy and all of the salvation, Be'ezrat Hashem. And thank you to all the supporters of the podcast, my friends. You make this happen. I've actually had many people contact me about advertising on the podcast, and I tell them that I don't accept advertising because it's sponsored by the listeners, and you really do, and I'm thankful to you and grateful to you. And if you'd like to become a sponsor, my friends, just go to my website. There's all kinds of ways to contribute. And of course, thank you to the many, many listeners of this podcast. And thank you to the people that stop me on the street and say Shalom Aleichem. You really make my day. And all the people that write to me. You can find my email on the website. I'm happy to hear from everyone. Thank you to all of you, my friends. I hope you have a beautiful Shabbos, a beautiful week. The preparations for Pesach are coming along. And until next week, my sweetest friends, take care of yourselves and sei gesund.